good evening. My name is Mariana, and I'm a teacher at Cultura Inglesa Butantã.
Hi, my name is Willie, and I'm also a teacher at Cultura Inglesa at Tatuapé.
And we're so excited to be here. First of all, we'd like to thank the academic department for this invitation. This is where we are. We're in the library of Cultura Inglesa's academic department, where the magic happens. And we're really excited to talk about this topic of traveling, which is something that we're both really, really passionate about. And hopefully we'll have some tips and suggestions that can help you out on your future traveling. And before we get started, we'd just like to remind you guys to, if you like the types of videos that Cultura produces, and make sure that you like this video, follow Cultura on Cultura's YouTube channel, and during the webinar, make sure that you post your questions both in English and in Portuguese. Então podem postar perguntas em português também, and we'll be answering them as the webinar progresses. Okay? So, viajando sem embromation. What does that mean? Today we're going to talk mostly about these topics. So we're going to be talking about some of the institutional tools that as a Cultura Inglesa student you have access to that could help you when you're traveling. And then we're also going to mention different tools that you guys can use while you're planning a trip and then while you're traveling yourselves, and then some strategies and some travel stories and things that can help you prepare for your future travels.
Okay, the first tool that we would like to talk about tonight is the eCampus, where we have more than 50 exercises related to travel. Things like checking in hotels, going through airport security and customs, and these include many videos as well. You can search using keywords, things like restaurants, hiring a car, etc., etc. Okay.
And all you have to do is by accessing your eCampus, which you can see on the screen, and searching by the keyword, then you can find the types of activities that you need the most help with. And sometimes this is something we're going to get into a little bit later, but oftentimes students mention that listening is something that they struggle with, and there's tons of listening exercises related to the topic of travel that will help you prepare and practice your listening skills, especially in this context of traveling. And something else is that we'd like to remind you guys that here at Cultura we have a course, the BCTT, the Basic Conversation Track on Travel, which is a conversation workshop which is all about traveling. So it's cool because it's a really practical course, and you take a look at situations that you would come across when you're traveling. So the language that you would need to eat out at a restaurant, to go shopping, to ask for directions, entertainment, buying tickets. So if you'd like more information about that, you can get in touch with any of the Cultura branches and see when this course is going to be offered. Reminder, mostly for basic students. So if you'd like something more in that area, then that's a really interesting possibility.
Yeah, really specific situations, very objective, to the point to prepare you for your trip.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And something else that, of course, we love to travel. Most people like to travel, but Willie, I wanted to ask you if you could comment a little bit about why is traveling so important? Not for, of course, for everyone, but more specifically to someone who is studying English.
Well, it exposes you to lots of different situations where you can use the language that you have acquired through so much effort. And many different contexts, remembering that language is all about context.
Sure.
Language is culture. Mm-hmm. Culture is language.
Mm-hmm.
Being exposed to these different cultural mm-hmm. situations, mm-hmm. It just enriches the whole experience of learning another language.
For sure, and really giving you an opportunity of actually seeing you know, the places and tasting the foods and seeing the sights that you know, that we see in class and that you've talked about and you've seen in films, and the experience of actually going to these places, of, you know, meeting these people, having this exchange of experiences. I think it's what makes us so passionate about traveling. And
Exactly.
then something that we love, you know, our students to
It brings the whole thing alive.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Great. So now we're gonna take a little look at some tools that you guys can use when you're planning a trip. And personally, I don't know, it's something, perhaps one of the, almost as good as traveling itself, in my opinion, is planning the trip. I don't know if you've...
It's one of the best parts, that feeling of excitement, the anticipation.
Yeah.
It's one of the best parts of the trip.
Yeah, and you know, you start getting excited and making the list of places that you want to travel to. And not only is it fun, but it's also really, really important to avoid, I don't know, maybe getting yourself into sticky situations. And so we're going to talk about some of the tools that can help you in this planning process. So, something that I think is quite cool and that I've done in the past couple of trips that I've taken is that I go onto YouTube and I look for tips related to a certain city that I'm visiting. So by doing a quick YouTube search on, you know, best sites in Barcelona or top 5 Rio de Janeiro or whatever city or whatever country you're visiting, it gives you, you know, you have access to a huge amount of information.
Exactly.
From bloggers, from YouTubers, from, you know, travel guides, to give you more ideas of, you know, the places that you can visit and that kind of thing.
And there's so much material out there as well, so you can actually refine your search as to what you're actually interested in and what you're looking for throughout your trip to that particular place.
Yeah, exactly. And something else that is really important and that sometimes is a bit daunting before we travel is the idea and the fear of getting lost, or I'm not going to be able to, you know,
Getting around.
Get around, and how do I get from the airport or the train station to my hotel or to the Airbnb I'm renting and that kind of thing. And it can be quite stressful. So after some bad situations in which, you know, you don't have any internet on your phone and any phone service, so some things that I've done in the past is like to download an offline version of a map of the city that you're going to, and you can do this through Google Maps. And you can also, in advance, use Google Street View to look at, for example, the address of the hotel you're staying at or your Airbnb or whatever it is, and actually use Street View to get an idea of what the area looks like.
You can become familiar with the immediate surroundings of your hotel. For example, you can find the facilities which are within walking distance, for another example.
Yeah, and it gives you kind of the reassurance that, okay, you know what building to look out for, right? Or you have some, you know, some idea of where things are before you get to a place which you've never been to, which of course can be quite intimidating.
Yeah. So also reading up and planning in advance is another good option. You know, the importance of reading reviews, seeing what you actually are looking for in advance, using, for example, TripAdvisor, which has countless testimonials. There's also Yelp for reviews on restaurants and other facilities.
Yeah, and this is so important because using these resources, these websites and other ones, especially to take a look at things like specific events that are going to be taking place at the time in which you're visiting the city. So imagine, maybe there's an amazing jazz festival happening, or a specific day of the week there's a free concert in a square or something.
Exactly.
So by taking a look, you make sure that you don't miss out on any of these cool experiences. And also, of course, when we're traveling is expensive, and by planning, you're able to take a look at, you know, a lot of museums are free on certain days of the week, so or other attractions. So if that's the kind of thing you like, make sure you take a look at to see when is the cheapest day or when is, you know, a free day, and then you can kind
special offers, promotions.
Yeah, plan your way plan your trip around that to, save some money. And also something I'd like to reinforce that Willie mentioned is read reviews carefully. Oh, so carefully. Every single positive and negative review. I don't
There are
know.
many conflicting opinions out there, so
Yeah.
I think the more reviews that you read and testimonials that you read, you can come to a better conclusion about the place that you want to visit.
Yeah, I remember once I had a negative experience when I was traveling I was in Florence with a group of friends, and we booked a hostel which was really cheap. We didn't really read many of the reviews. It was just an amazing location, really good price, so we booked it. And when we arrived there, we found out that there was something that they called a lockout time, which meant that guests couldn't be in the hostel from 9 a.m. until like 6 p.m. So they would kick us out really early, and sometimes when we would be, still sleeping, and it was terrible. And if we had read reviews more carefully, we wouldn't have, we obviously would have booked another place. So it can really, taking the time to, plan the place that you're going to stay and the sites that you're going to visit, can really help you have a much better experience.
Exactly.
And something else that I've started using more frequently as a big fan of the gram, as we call it, I've started, before a trip, I like to look for pages on Instagram and profiles that are about specific cities. So, for instance, this year I traveled to Brighton in the UK, and a few weeks before I started following a profile on Instagram that was called Visit Brighton, and where they posted cool pictures of, things to do, restaurants, bars, museums, events that would be taking place. And it's something that's, easy to access, because if you're a heavy user of social media, it's something that you're always looking at and scrolling through.
And also places like Brighton, there's so much to do. It's good to be selective beforehand, choosing what you want to do, where you want to do it, and when you want to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, from very quick research, I see that a lot of cities are kind of, and sometimes these are pages that are organized even sometimes by the local city governments. They're really investing on social media to promote these pages, so you can find these visit touristic pages on Instagram from places all over the world. And so and I'm sure you can find them on Facebook, Twitter also, but Instagram's just one that, since images are quite helpful, it's a good one. So we have a question. So I'm going to read this and then we'll answer it together.
Okay.
Great. So one of the most difficult situations that I've been in was trying to ask for help in English in emergency situations. Once I lost my baggage, how to start asking for help in this kind of situation? Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that obviously is like worst case scenario, things that we never want to happen, but that do happen, right?
It's happened to me many times.
Has it really?
Yeah, baggage being sent to the wrong place, baggage that never arrived at the airport. So this is quite a challenge for the traveller.
Yeah, so let's think of, what's the first thing that you can do? Perhaps, this is something we're going to talk a little bit about, is that you can prepare yourself and kind of take with you, take notes on your phone of some sentences and of the language that you can use in these emergency situations.
Thinking what could happen.
Exactly.
Okay, and anticipating the situation, maybe looking at the language that you might need for this particular situation to initiate the process at least.
And exactly, and remember that, if you're going to a country that you don't speak the language, and considering that maybe if you're traveling you won't have internet access and you won't have access to a translator so quickly, try to anticipate that. So have these sentences, somewhere else, to make sure that you're
saved on your phone, for example.
Saved on your phone, for instance, or even if you're old school and want to carry a little notebook or something.
Put it on paper, yeah.
Yeah, to know that you have that as a safety net, for that if this happens, you feel a lot more better prepared to talk to airport security and talk to the airline to see how they can help you to find your stuff as quickly as possible.
As we'll discuss further on, preparation is the key. The better prepared you are, the more successful I think your trip is going to be.
Yeah, for sure. And it also, just helps you make sure that you travel in a calmer state of mind, feeling a bit more comfortable, feeling less anxious about, everything that could possibly go wrong if you're better prepared for it, right?
Exactly.
Cool. Great. So I'm considering that you've done all of this planning and you've looked at wonderful places to visit. You have an idea of an itinerary. Now it's time to finally travel, right? So now we're going to talk about some of the tools that you guys can use when you're actually on your trip.
Okay, first of all, translators. They can be useful, but we need to be careful about the context of what we're looking up. I prefer Lingui. I don't know about you, Maddie. What do you?
Yeah, so there's a reason, and students always kind of like, oh, teacher, why do you hate Google Translate? It's not just me, it's
all of us.
It's all of us.
Yeah.
Because, and I do agree with Willie, I think Lingui is a lot more reliable translator.
It provides a little more context, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Well, not always. This is something that we need to always take into consideration, the context of the language that you need for a particular situation.
Yeah, so always keep that in mind before using a translator, but of course we know that it's extremely practical to have a translator at hand to help you when you don't know what a word says on a sign or something like that,
or maybe in an emergency situation, as in the question that was asked before.
For sure, so that's definitely a good idea. Now, there are some other possibilities beyond translators that you can use when you come across language that you don't know. Now, something I've used in the past was using Google Images on my phone, and especially when it comes to food. So I'm sure this has happened to you, Willie, when you travel and you look at a menu and there's like tons of stuff that you have no idea
You don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And you can have a nasty surprise, especially if there's some foods that you can't eat, or if you have dietary restrictions, or simply food that you don't like.
Yeah, so. And even, and that even if you speak the language, even if, I remember when I went to the UK the last time, and I was looking at a menu and there was tons of stuff I didn't know, and by using a Google image search, it can help you a lot more than a dictionary or a translator. I'll give you a silly example. I was at a restaurant in London, and they had sole on the menu, S-O-L-E, and I didn't know what this was. And it was like, like grilled sole with vegetables, blah,
Is it
blah,
a shoe?
blah, blah. Yeah, and I was like that was the only thing that came to mind. And I Google imaged it really quickly, and I found out that it's a fish. And here, just so that you could compare, like if I had used Google Translate to translate it into Portuguese, I would have a definition of one of the possibilities of the word soul in English. So you see, like a translator was totally useless.
Único.
Único. Yeah, like great. That wouldn't have helped me at all. But I'm like, oh great, soul, fish. I like fish. Let's do it. It was delicious.
Okay.
Thank you, Google Images. And so by quickly doing a Google image search of the name of a dish or something can already give you an idea of if it looks like something that you'd like to eat and that kind of thing. So don't forget about Google Images before when you're looking for stuff that you don't know. And we have... Cool. So we have a question about any important expressions. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Thanks for the question. And something else that I think is an interesting tool, I don't know, have you ever used Couchsurfing, Willie? Do you know what it is?
Personally, I haven't used it, but I have a general idea of what it's about. Okay. I know there are many testimonials. People really describe places that they go to in quite some detail, apparently. Have you used it?
I haven't used it myself, so afterwards you guys can research and look online. Couchsurfing is an online community of travelers who exchange kind of accommodation in which you offer a place to sleep at your house for free to travelers, and then the idea is that then you can also, when you're traveling, stay in someone else's house
A great way to meet local people.
Exactly. It's a great way to meet local people, and of course a very cheap way to travel. So there's this aspect, of course, of accommodation. And something else that I think Couchsurfing does quite well is that they have online groups. So it's a really, really cool way to meet travelers. Even if you're not couchsurfing, as in staying in someone's house, even if you're staying in a hotel or a hostel, if you look for couchsurfing groups on the Couchsurfing website or on Facebook, so for example, Couchsurfing São Paulo, or Couchsurfing London, or Couchsurfing Boston, or wherever it is you're traveling to, you can find groups of foreigners and of locals who are willing to meet up with you, to have a chat, to give you recommendations of places to go to. And this is, I think, a really cool idea if you're traveling by yourself, or maybe you're traveling with just another friend. You'd like to meet up, you'd like to make friends, you'd like to meet new people.
Great way to meet people, yeah.
And, it starts online, so, most people are on Facebook. Take a look at a group and see if they have a meetup, if they have any get-togethers. My boyfriend and I did this when we were in Barcelona, traveling just the two of us, and we're like, we'd like to hang out with other people, and it was a cool way to meet locals and meet other travelers also. And especially if you're looking to, of course, practice your English while you're traveling.
Great opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And something else that I've used while I was traveling is that, of course, we've talked about the travel guides and the websites where you can find information on places to visit, but maybe you're looking to visit some places that are kind of off the beaten path, kind of things that aren't too touristy. You want to hang out with
something
local,
a bit more alternative.
Yeah, a bit more alternative and a bit more local. Something I've done in the past is use dating apps, even like Tinder, to find other users, match with them, and then you don't even have to go on a date. Like, of course, if you want to, great, just be safe and everything. But I would use it just to ask for recommendations. So, find locals on Tinder, and then just ask, like, hey, where's a good place to eat, pizza? Or what's going on tonight? What's a cool party to go to? Or what's a neighborhood or a park that you like to visit? Because then you can get kind of this insider information from locals that perhaps isn't available in guidebooks or on, traditional travel websites.
Use the technology.
Exactly. And I've gone to, cool places that I wouldn't have had access to and I wouldn't have heard about if I hadn't, actually gotten these ideas from locals. So it's something to consider.
We have a new question here.
Yes.
What is the best conduct in the case of a police search?
Yeah,
well,
cool.
My advice is, first of all, avoid any situations where you're going to have contact with the police. That's the first thing that came to my mind. Obviously, if you are searched for some unfortunate reason, be polite, be respectful, and I'm sure in most places they will be respectful to you, and just comply and follow their orders. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And also, stay calm. And something I think is important to mention to Brazilians, because I think we're very good humored and everything, is like, this is not the moment to crack jokes or try to be funny. Just do as Willie said, to be serious, stay calm, and of course, first of all, don't put yourself into a situation in which the police
That's the best advice,
would need to search you. Just be extra careful.
Yeah. But
this happened to me once. I was traveling. I was in Paris. I was going from Paris to London, and randomly I was going by train. The police in the security in the train station, they took me aside and they said they first asked me very bluntly. They're like, "Oh, are you carrying like 50 million euros in your backpack?" And I was like, "No."
You wish.
I wish, right?
Yeah.
If that was the case, maybe I wouldn't be traveling by train. But I didn't say that, of course. I was just like, "No, of course not." And they looked through everything in my backpack. They opened up, all of my belongings and everything, and I just stayed calm because I had,
stay quiet.
Exactly.
Be compliant.
Be compliant. Answered all of their questions, and so I think of course, always be careful. And something I think is worth mentioning is just be very, very careful and very aware of your belongings,
Exactly.
Keep your suitcases and your backpacks with you at all times, especially when you're in airports and train stations
Be
and
careful
bus
with
stations.
cell phones and cameras, etc.
Exactly. So that's something to be really, really aware of.
Okay. Also, if you're driving and the police stop you, keep your hands on the wheel and don't leave the car unless instructed to do that. So follow the orders of the police in a very calm manner and answer truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, always be truthful.
Yeah, that's good advice. I'd say so. And yeah, I would say it's not something that commonly happens, right? I think in driving, I don't know. I've never driven abroad, but
It can happen if you rent a car and you're
Right.
driving.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not too familiar with the local rules and regulation and driving laws. Maybe you can commit a small infraction without knowing it and could be stopped for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, just follow that advice.
Mm-hmm.
I think in most cases the police will be quite understanding.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Exactly. And then, since we were talking about preparation, and if you're planning on driving abroad, also, since Willie mentioned this, perhaps it's a good idea to inform yourself about, if there are any different
Exactly.
traffic laws than where you're coming from, to better prepare yourself and avoid, committing any infraction.
Especially in the UK, the US,
Mm-hmm.
things are very, very different, and they are very strict as far
Right.
as driving laws and regulations are concerned. You won't get away with anything.
Yeah. So.
So,
Okay. So we have a question about the voice translator app.
it's actually a tip, yeah?
Oh, cool. Yeah, recommendation. Have you ever used this app, Willie?
Personally, no.
So yeah, we have a recommendation of installing an app called Voice Translator. You can choose a language and it translates everything you say or write at once. Cool. So this is definitely something that can come in handy, especially if you're traveling to a country in which you
Have no knowledge of the language whatsoever.
Yeah. That
Okay.
seems to be very practical.
Excellent. Thank you for your tip.
I've never used it myself, but I've also heard of translator apps which use image recognition, so you can use photos. I know a friend of mine who traveled to South Korea used this quite a lot to take pictures of menus and everything, and they would translate it
Okay.
for you. So that's something you can also investigate and have on your phone if you're traveling to a country if this is the case.
Okay, another question. Do you believe that voice translators will replace speakers during the trip in the future?
Mm-hmm.
I hope not, because we'd be out of a job.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think we should all aim to be able to communicate in person. It's a much richer experience. It's much more precise. I'm sure there's some things that will be lost in the translation. This is why we learn languages after all, isn't it?
And if you think about it, if you think of the way that we communicate, and the way that we communicate goes far beyond just the words that we use, right? So if you think about how much we communicate in terms of our intonation,
Exactly.
and how we use language flexibly, and that's the richness of being able to communicate and exchanging experiences with someone.
It's a pretty cold interaction, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit soulless, isn't it?
Very useful, yeah. Quite soulless, yeah. Useful in situations when you have no alternative, but I think for meaningful interaction with other people, having a conversation, I think would be quite bizarre through a voice translator, to tell you the truth.
Exactly. And if you think about things like humor and irony and all of these things that aren't really, can't be really perceived,
maybe they'll be lost, yeah.
Exactly, through this type of app. So we have a good question on any tips on how to stay safe while couchsurfing. I think this is a big concern, especially if you're a woman traveling, especially traveling by yourself.
Certainly.
So some things I think that are definitely useful is that if you're couchsurfing, be very, very aware of the reviews that are left on the person's
Definitely.
profile before you accept, before you
Reviews, testimonials.
exactly, to make sure. I think Couchsurfing, they do kind of have measures to make sure that
Exactly.
travelers are safe by having profiles that are verified, and they have a system in which users that have been using the community and the website for longer, they have, you get kind of like status badges.
They have ratings, yeah.
Exactly, they have rating systems.
And find out who your hosts are. Who are they? Is it a family or is it just one person?
Yeah, so if you're insecure, maybe you're traveling by yourself, maybe you'd feel more comfortable staying with the family, right? So look into that, try to favor those types of hosts if that's someone you'd feel more comfortable with, or staying with another woman if you're a woman traveling by yourself. These are some ways to kind of avoid putting yourself in a dangerous situation.
And where the host is. I mean, where do they live? Which district do they live in the city, for example? Maybe it's not such a safe place. That's something that you could look up beforehand.
Yeah, that's a good idea also.
Yeah.
And have a backup plan, right? Of course, don't put yourself in any situations in which you're at risk, but think about, if this accommodation situation with Couchsurfing doesn't work, where can I go, right? Where can I stay instead? So perhaps that's something else to keep in mind.
A bailout plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great, we'll take a look at some more questions. Cool.
Good question.
Good question. This is, someone asked us that what's the best way and the most polite way to ask someone to repeat themselves or to speak a bit slower? And this is something that will happen quite a lot when you're traveling. And usually this is the area when we talk about, in terms of listening, that we struggle the most with. And it's quite common, especially if you're going to a country in which maybe you haven't been exposed to the accent before.
Exactly.
You misunderstand.
Many people, when they travel to the United Kingdom, they're quite surprised by the amount of accents that they will come across. If you go to London, you must remember that there are a huge number of non-native speakers that might have very heavy first language accents. There are many people from Asia, places like India, Pakistan, Chinese people. So they're not going to speak the Queen's English, let's say. If you travel north to Scotland, where I'm from, even people from England have difficulty understanding. So you can prepare yourself, you can expose yourself to maybe some different accents in advance. This is where YouTube can come in handy.
Sure.
There's a huge amount of material out there on that. Also, think about the context, the surroundings that you're in, as Mari mentioned before. Tone of voice, gestures, facial expressions. These are things that can really help you in different situations.
Yeah, and if it's the case that, like you mentioned, Willie is from Scotland. When I went to Scotland a few years ago, I speak English fluently, and I would struggle quite a bit when I was talking to some people. And I think it's something that you don't need to be embarrassed about.
Of course not.
And, just ask the person here. We put up some sentences that could be helpful and are polite, of saying something like, "I'm sorry, could you please repeat that?" Or, "I'm sorry, could you speak slower, please?" And most of the people will be very willing to help you and to repeat themselves or to express themselves in another way that would be easier for you to understand. So those are some...
In my experience, nobody has ever refused to repeat something or to speak slower. I think the vast majority of people out there are very accommodating.
Yeah, and think about how...
They're willing to help.
Yeah, and think about how when we're, as Brazilians, when we're here in Brazil and we see a foreigner that's, struggling to speak Portuguese or that don't understand, we're always so patient,
Of course, yeah.
Remember that when you're abroad, that you don't need to be embarrassed or you don't need to...
I remember when I was learning Portuguese.
Yeah.
People were very, very helpful. Yeah. Of course, I had said some silly things sometimes, and people laughed, but that's how you learn.
That's okay, and that's
Yeah.
part of it, right?
Yeah.
But I really like your suggestion of exposing yourself to the accent before.
Yeah.
So imagine, you know that you're going to Australia in a couple of months, or you're going to Scotland, or you're going to South Africa. You know, as Willie said, take a look at some material on YouTube, things like commercials, or YouTubers that are from that country,
Exactly.
series,
Authentic
films.
material, yeah.
Yeah, because that way, by exposing yourself to the accent, you start familiarizing yourself a bit more with the different sounds, and this will help you once you arrive, that you're a lot more comfortable and you're a lot more used to this accent than if you had never been exposed to it before. Great.
We have another question.
Yes.
How long should we stay in a country to have a good experience understanding the language? As long as possible. To have a great experience as well, apart from learning the language. What do you think, Mad?
Yeah, I think sometimes people have this idea of that, oh, I'm not going to take advantage of the situation or be able to improve my English unless I stay for a really long time.
That's not quite true.
That's not quite true. If you think about, when you're traveling, I think you really make a point of exposing yourself to the language as much as you possibly can, and of communicating at every opportunity that you have.
Interacting with as many different people as you can.
Then in terms of your English production, that's already going to, to be improved immensely, regardless if you're staying there for, 1 week, a month, or, 3 months or a year. So I think the key idea is to really expose yourself to as many opportunities to communicate in English as you possibly can.
And in a variety of different situations. In this way, you're exposing yourself to different types of language, different contexts, as we mentioned before, which are, all part of the language.
Yeah, and I think really making a point of meeting and interacting with people from different countries. This is, possibly the best part of traveling, right? The people that you meet.
Making friends.
Yeah, making friends, and, the amount of things that you can learn about other cultures, other countries when you're traveling. That's the funnest part. And you can do that, if you're staying, doesn't matter if you're staying a weekend or a month in a place, right?
And as you said before, getting off the beaten track,
Yeah.
Going to other places maybe where tourists wouldn't necessarily go. Locals will help you with that. If you engage them in conversation, they'll be more than happy to indicate the restaurants that they go to that are maybe not such tourist traps. Maybe you can actually eat for cheaper, have a more authentic cultural experience.
Yeah, that's where, I think that's where the magic is, kind of getting and going places that are beyond, what you find in tourist guides and everything. That'll really enrich your experience of the city that you're in. And, okay, so, continuing on to what we were saying, is that, alright, so, a lot of times students struggle with this idea of the fear of not being able to communicate, or to express themselves. Something that's really important is remembering the vocabulary that you need. So this is where, if you already study English, excellent time to revisit the vocabulary that you will need for specific situations.
Exactly.
So that's like we were talking about, of how planning is so important. If you know that, you're going to travel to New York and you want to watch a Broadway play, revisit the vocabulary that you're going to need to buy tickets and that kind of thing in these more transactional situations.
Exactly. Or
to go shopping. Review this type of vocabulary that you will need, so that once you're in the situation, you're already a lot more comfortable, and you know what language to use, and you're better prepared.
Exactly. And also, you're not obviously going to be just having transactions. You're going to have interactions as well. So maybe look at some language, conversational language, when you're meeting friends, for example, when you're making friends with other people. This can help immensely.
Exactly.
Well.
So like Willie said, when you're traveling, you're not just going to be having transactions at a restaurant, at a grocery store.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. And so think about, try to anticipate the types of conversations that you might have. For instance, think about the things that foreigners would be curious about once they hear that you're from Brazil. I'm sure they'll ask about football, or they'll ask about the election that we've just had. So think about the vocabulary that would be useful to express yourself, to give your opinion, to share experiences, to talk about, what's going on in your country, what it's like.
Talk about yourself.
Yeah, to talk about yourself, to talk about what life is like in your city, in your neighborhood, so that you can have, more interesting, enriching conversations when you're at the pub, or when you're, meeting people, chatting to people in your hostel, and that kind of thing. Cool.
We have another question. Do you believe that visiting places that have fewer tourists on trips abroad can help more to improve our language skills? Yes, basically.
So I think sometimes, I think a concern of Brazilian students oftentimes is if they go to, to take a month-long course abroad or something, they're always concerned that it's going to be full of Brazilians and they're going to end up speaking Portuguese.
It's very common, yeah.
It's very common, and it is, I think, a relevant concern and an important concern to have. So perhaps that is a good point. Maybe going to countries or to cities that have fewer tourists, that'll definitely give you more opportunities to talk to people of other countries that aren't, that aren't Brazilian or who don't speak Portuguese.
Exactly.
And I think nowadays you have, language institutes and language schools all over the world. So maybe avoid going to the ones that are, more popular at the time, right? So we have so many
that
places.
Are maybe not so much tourist destinations, they're more places for study.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an interesting possibility. And cool. And thinking of this idea of what we were talking about of meeting locals and going kind of to places that are off the beaten path.
Immersing yourself in that particular place, yeah?
Yeah, in that particular place. Something that I like to do when I'm traveling is look for free walking tours that happen in a lot of cities around the world, and they have the advantage of most of the time being free, or just asking for a small contribution at the end, which is optional. So free, if you're looking to save money.
Free is always good.
Yeah. And then it gives you the opportunity to perhaps visit places that aren't so touristy. And if you're going to big cities, I remember when I was in Berlin, one of the coolest things I did was that we found that they had a street art walking tour. So it didn't even mention the
specific
biggest
themes,
tourist attractions in Berlin, but we visited neighborhoods that were not touristy at all, but that were famous in Berlin and had a history of being very bohemian neighborhoods, and neighborhoods that were famous for their street art and for their murals, and where a lot of big German street artists started. So it was really, really cool, and we were able to see a side of the city and that we wouldn't have if we had just gone to the, traditional postcard destinations of the city. So I think that's something that's always worth researching wherever you go. And even São Paulo has a free walking tour. Have you ever been on it?
No, I haven't. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I've never been either, but some foreign friends of mine have told me that it's great. So maybe even if you live in your own city in Brazil, that you don't know quite well, maybe you could learn a lot about your city going on these free walking tours, and then meet other foreigners, practice your English. Why not?
Of course.
Cool. Now we'd like to share some stories that I think demonstrate kind of the types of strategies that you can use when you're traveling to have the best experience possible. So this is something that happened to me in January. In January of this year, I was in Barcelona, and I was traveling just my boyfriend and I, and we were staying in, we were renting an Airbnb, So, we didn't have as many opportunities to meet people as you would if you were staying in a hostel or something like that. And then I think it was like a Wednesday night, and we had gone out to dinner, and we wanted to go out. We wanted to, go to a party or go to a nightclub or something like that. But we didn't really know where to go. We had done some research, but we hadn't really found anything on guides or on social media or anything. And we were at a bar just having a beer, and at the table next to us we saw a group of people like our age, and they, it was like a big group of friends, and they were chatting and being like really loud. And I told my boyfriend, I was like, it looks like they're going, somewhere
They're
after
going somewhere,
this.
yeah.
They're going somewhere fun. And I don't speak Spanish. I don't, Catalan even less. And so, but I decided to go up to them in my very broken Spanish and ask them I tried to ask them, like, hey, where are you guys going? Do you know of any cool events happening tonight? My boyfriend and I, we're from Brazil. We don't, we're traveling. We're looking for somewhere fun to go to dance tonight. And they were super nice and super welcoming. And they're like, oh, of course, we're going to our friend's birthday party, which is at a dance hall club, not far from here. Come with us. It'll be great. And then we went, and they were super friendly, and they included us in their, with their group of friends. And it was something that if I had been too embarrassed to talk to them, to ask them, or too shy, we wouldn't have had this. Yeah, we wouldn't have had this.
Yeah.
This great experience. And so I think that's something that I always keep in mind when I'm traveling, is that, what's the worst thing that could have happened? I could have asked them, and they could have said, oh, no, we don't know. And that's fine. And we wouldn't have lost anything from that. So
I had a very similar experience in Spain as well. I was in Valencia. I was traveling alone, and I was in a restaurant. And across the street from the restaurant, I could see the small doorway in this huge building. And there were lots and lots of people entering this building with all sorts of equipment. And there were a group of people at the table next to me. And in my even more broken Spanish than yours, I asked them what was going on. And they said it was a flamenco festival, and which they were actually involved in. And they invited me to come along with them. I ended up spending 3 days with them, actually sort of being in the midst of this flamenco festival, which was not actually too open to the public.
Right.
It was, for themselves. And that was a real privilege. And as you said, if I hadn't been so cheeky as to ask what was going on, I all but invited myself along, and I made very, very good friends, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah, so I think that really demonstrates how it's so important for you not to be afraid to communicate, and to be cheeky, and to, what's the worst thing? What's the worst thing that can happen? So just start conversations with strangers, and like in Willie's story, ask what's going on, and ask for recommendations, ask for help.
And in my experience, no one has ever refused to help.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've done a lot of traveling, and people are very accommodating. They will really try to help you out.
Excellent. So we just like to give you a few reminders that if you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you like this video, leave your comments, subscribe to Cultura's channel. And if you have any further questions, leave them in the comments also, and we'll be happy to answer. And also, if you're a Cultura Inglesa student, we know that the semester is coming to an end and the test is approaching. So we'd like to remind you guys too, if you have any doubts about any of the language that you've been studying, of anything that you might need, make sure that you use the eTutor app function on eCampus to send any of the doubts. Super helpful.
It's my guide as well, which will guide you through the process.
Excellent.
And of course eCampus.
And of course eCampus, which you know about, which you love, and which is there to help you, especially in these weeks coming up to the test, to really help you revise and consolidate.
Some great practice there.
Yeah. And this webinar, if you would like to revisit it, if you would like to send it to a friend, it's going to be available on our YouTube channel. And something else, if listening is one of the areas that you're most concerned about when it comes to traveling, I strongly recommend that you take a look at a webinar that we had a few weeks ago run by teacher Raquel and teacher Fabiana that was specifically on listening. And the name is Escuto, Escuto, Não Entendo Nada. Lots of helpful tips that you can definitely put in practice once you're traveling.
Great preparation for travel.
Yeah. And remember to have fun, enjoy your trips that you might be taking in this end of the year, and have fun, practice your English.
Exactly. Make the most of it.
Make the most of it. Don't be afraid to communicate, and then come back and tell your English classmates and your teachers about it. We'd love to hear students' travel stories as much as we like sharing our own, right?
Of course.
And that's it. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you and good night.
Thanks. Good night, guys. See you.
Bye.